Hello everyone, some tips and tricks on how to be enlightened. I was enlightened about 5 years ago, but it only lasted 1.5 days. I've been doing mindfulness for about 25 years now. But maybe you might be lucky. I can give you some tips and tricks on how to be enlightened. And maybe you might be lucky, enlightenment might be more permanent for you. But the tip and trick is don't identify. If you could tattoo that on your hand to remind yourself, the whole aspect of enlightenment is that we're already enlightened, but we identify with our ego as our identity, and it's this ego that makes dramas all the time. So don't identify. The trick is to learn about your ego, and I'm not going to tell people not to watch those. There's a lot of videos now that are popular about narcissists, that teach you about narcissists. I'm not going to say not to watch them, but it's important to recognize that if you can learn about narcissist behavior, which is the ego, but it's important not to assume that that's someone's identity as well, because that's the ego. So, and it's your own ego that's actually assuming the ego as another, within another, as their identity. So and what you misperceive in another, you also misperceive in yourself. So really, enlightenment's about getting that. It's really about you. Nothing wrong with sort of watching videos on narcissistic behavior and what people's egos do, not what they do. Because ultimately, underneath, we're not our ego. We're the life giver of it, because we keep identifying with it, and it keeps running like a record player in the background, and it keeps running its rackets every day. So mindfulness, it teaches you to stop identifying with your ego, learn what your ego is, learn how it makes judgments on situations, and then it becomes upset about the judgments that it made. And then we assume that we're the one that made this judgment, and we are the reactor to the judgment, and that's our ego. So as you become more and more familiar, your ego lessens. Your ego can't come out when you're aware of it. The whole definition of ego means there's a great assumption going on that you believe, because the ego is within us, you believe that's who you are. And because there's something speaking on your behalf, that's you speaking on your behalf. But that's what causes ego, is that assumption. So when you break this assumption, you sort of like stand back within yourself and observe your ego. So you see that I'm not my ego, and I'm looking at my ego, rather than being completely obsessed or identified that you are your ego and all its dramas and reactions. And that's how you break the cycle eventually. If you keep doing it, your awareness gets stronger and stronger. You learn to smile at your ego, not take it so seriously anymore, and eventually your ego begins to lessen and weaken, because you're not feeding it with your attention anymore. And what is ego? It's ultimately just an idea in our head. It's a pseudo identity constructed of stories of the past and projections of the future, but there's only right now. So as you become more and more familiar with your ego, then you learn to distinguish and discern from it. You generate this distinguishment and discernment between you and it. And this is what eventually weakens the ego. It exposes the ego within you, and then you learn eventually not to take it personally, just allow it to keep unfolding, because it is going to keep unfolding. And then as you accept your ego more and more, and you not take it so seriously, that's when it really gets dissolved. Eventually it gets to the point and this is how enlightenment happens, where you don't assume this ego as your identity anymore. You can see it's just an idea in your head that was taught at a young age, and that's what we're all doing. We're all identified with it. So you just break that identification cycle, and you're not deluding yourself. You're just seeing what's real and what's not, what's false, and what's real and what's false. So the reason why the ego is false, because it's an idea, and you're not an idea. You're the awareness of the idea. You're the life giver of an idea. You know, and there's many ideas that pass within us that we don't give our attention to, so it doesn't turn into ego. So just notice what particular things your ego might react to. There's certain situations that everyone's got that create triggers for our particular ego. Some things we don't have ego, so we laugh at the situation, whereas the person next to us cries of the situation. So yeah, that's important, to become familiar with all the particular triggers, and then eventually you see that you're not the one being triggered. You're the awareness of that. You're the one that's stepping back and observing that. And that's where that cognition happens. And eventually the cognition might happen so much that it separates totally this ego identification. And then what's left was already there, which is enlightenment, was already within you. So you can't, and there's no one actually being enlightened. You're already enlightened. It's just your natural state. Unenlightenment comes from when we identify with this idea identity, which is the ego. So that's how you do it, folks. Tips and tricks on how to become enlightened. Use it every day. Try to bring mindfulness to your ego, observe it. And the main trick is, don't take it seriously. Like, see if you can step back to such a point where it's not personal. That's the old ideal goal of enlightenment. And when it's really not personal anymore, because it's the ego sort of coming in through the background and taking it personal of itself, sort of. So as you become aware of it, don't take it personally. Don't feed it with your attention anymore. Just like there's many things in your life you don't feed with your attention anymore and don't bother you. And see the correlation between that ultimately it's the ego placing labels upon our experiences and it becoming disturbed of its own labels, and we assume all this to be us. So then, life without the ego is very simple. There's no more dramas. There's just love and easiness and easy going. It's like when we're relaxed, sort of. That's sort of kind of what an enlightenment's like. But real enlightenment, it's massive, it's huge. It's like 1,000,000 kilos lifted. My one just sort of popped up in the morning one day when I woke up, saw my ego in front of me, it was sort of like a dream, visionless dream, and then enlightenment happened in just 1 second as I opened my eyes, and it was like 1,000,000 kilograms lifted in an instant, and then there was no more monkey mind chatter, nothing. There's just silence. There was just no more anger, offendedness. It was impossible to have that because I wasn't a somebody anymore. So a somebody is just an idea. It's a story of a past and certain things that happen and certain things people told me who I am, and all this correlates into a bundle of ideas which becomes a story, and we associate with that bundle. That's me. I'm that. And that's when I am that. I am this, looking at that. So that's that's kind of a visualization of what enlightenment feels like. And eventually you get to the point where there's no more somebody anymore. And because you're not a somebody, you're just consciousness, you're awareness, you're the life giver to all ideas. Then there's no one offended anymore. It's like they asked Buddha once, he became enlightened in his 30s or something, and then he lived to about 90, and his disciples used to ask, how come you don't get offended anymore? And he goes, I look inside and there's nothing that the words hit anymore. So there's like a sentence that Eckhart Tolle says, become comfortable becoming no one. Because that's just another pointer. So it's this ego is this somebody. And it's somebody which reacts to the 6 things in life. What someone said, what someone didn't say, what someone did, what they didn't do, what happened and what didn't happen. So it's always in a constant state of resistance to what is. And then we keep identifying with it. So it keeps on doing it. It's like that other story where they say which wolf grows the most. You've got the angry wolf or the happy wolf or something like this. And it depends on which one you feed the most. So don't feed your ego with your attention. Eventually it gets to the point where its shop's closed and it won't sort of come anymore, because you don't feed it with your attention anymore. So learn to gradually each day lessen your attention that you give to it. Still look at the ego within you, recognize and become familiar with its characteristics, what it likes to complain about, what it likes to resist, and make stories about, and realize that everything that talks is always the ego. That's what happened to me in enlightenment. There was no more talker anymore, and there's no more emotions anymore. So all emotions come from the ego when it makes a label upon experience, and then that bounces back and creates a corresponding emotion based on the label that was imposed. So that's important to see that correlation. So when you're enlightened, there is no more emotions, but you got there's just love and peace. So that's not an emotion. Emotion to me is it's a thought which the ego makes about life, and then it bounces back as an emotion based on the thought, not life itself. And so there's another correlation there. You see that without the label imposed upon reality is, pretty easy and effortless. And it's not us making these labels. The never-ending label-making gun is the ego. It's always talking, always criticizing, always saying this should be and this shouldn't be, and they should have this and they should have that, and they shouldn't have this, and this should have happened and shouldn't, and all the shoulds and shoulds. So become familiar with that, and I don't know what else. What else can I say? Yeah, don't try to make it a goal, because it's almost like the ego. Or ego always does that. It tries to make enlightenment a goal, and then but then you're in the ego, so you can't be enlightened. So that's don't sort of make it a goal. Just all you need to do is just become aware of that's false and that's true. What is true is you're the awareness, you're the observer, you're the one that's standing back, not giving your attention to this ego anymore. And the ego is just a bundle of ideas. It's constantly getting upgraded every week, like our mobile phone, constantly changing. And remember also that at 2 years old or 1 year old, you didn't even have an ego yet. So it's because you have to learn language, and then through language you create ideas, and then through ideas, and especially people telling you who you are and who you're not, and you create this bundle of ideas which grows. And then by the time you're 7 years old, your ego's quite established, and then it starts generating thoughts on its own and starts creating an identity on its own. But all these identities, they're false, because they're just ideas. You're the witness and the observer of them, and there's many times throughout your day you're not identifying with this idea, personality. You're when you're relaxed, and you temporarily forget about it. So you're already doing mindfulness every day anyway. But if you do it deliberately, make it a practice each day to at least try it a little bit. And you can only do mindfulness when the ego has been agitated and activated. You can it's good to learn about mindfulness, like watch videos like this when there's calmness and peace. But the only way enlightenment can happen, you've got to wait for it to be activated. So when it becomes activated, then you start to see, hang on a minute. Let's see. So now you heard that comment within you, it made it to the situation, and then within a second or so, not even a second, straight away this emotion came. And then see if you can stand back. One, accept the emotion and allow it, and then somehow can you actually see within yourself, that's not me being emotional, and I wasn't the one that even made that judgment about the situation. See if you can see the neutrality of situations. Create that cognition and decipher between here is the situation and here is my ego's opinion about the situation. So and as you generate that cognition, it probably, I think on a scientific level, it strengthens that pineal gland, which is the seat of the soul, and it just gets stronger and stronger, the pineal gland, because it's so weak. Where 99% of us just assume the ego is us, and it's just an automatic process. Whenever it gets drama, we believe that's us. And but yeah, it's I think I believe, yeah, in a scientific way, you can probably say it's like strengthening that pineal gland, and which is in the center of our brain, and then it gets stronger, and that's where the awareness comes from, and many other sort of enlightenment experiences all come from, they say, the pineal gland. So So you exercise that muscle because it hasn't been used your whole life, really. Everything in our life, they tell us we're our ego. Every movie you watch, every commercial you watch, every song lyric you hear is that we are our ego, which is the complete opposite to this video. So, so enlightenment's about, yeah, I guess you start to see the silliness of all that shit out there, and you're not interested in following the crowd anymore. You don't mind being the 1% group that's happy to explore and within yourself. And then as you become more and more mindful, that pineal gland, it gets really strong, and eventually it's so aware that whatever the ego does and all its comments and that, you just look at it and you're like, it's like you have several people. There's like a scene once I seen. There was like a training video teaching people sort of about the difference between different egos in different people. It was a convenience store robbery, and there's like a bikie in the store. There's a lady, there's a man, and then someone holds up the store, and the lady, she's quivering, and the man's on the ground in the fetal position, and the cashier, he's giving the money, and the bikie, he's at the fridge buying a drink, and he looks over and sees everything, and he goes, but I don't know, that's sort of a description, sort of describe that everyone's got different egos and different, and it creates a label and ultimately creates a filter of our experience. So the idea of enlightenment is to get underneath all of that, all those filters, see how those filters are created and pop them from the inside out. So then now you don't have these filters imposing on top of life anymore. Because ultimately the filters are never ending from the ego. It keeps on going. It keeps spinning its stories. It won't stop. It'll create, and as time goes on, it just spins more and more stories. So it's almost like a sinking ship, our ego. We've got to get off it. We've got to learn a bit of mindfulness. Learn to become mindful of it. Don't take it seriously, and eventually it just gets to the point where, you know what, I don't believe you anymore. I've heard your stories my whole life, but I don't buy them anymore. Shop's closed. Bye bye ego. And that's sort of how it happens. All right, thanks guys. Bye.